Hey everybody, Charan Moore here. Super excited to let you guys know that I am now officially a part of the Brother Leader Trade KTM team. Honestly, it's a dream come true and I couldn't be happier at the moment. So this is the weapon of choice for the 2020 season. It's the 450 XCF KTM. Absolute weapon. It's a combination of the enduro bike and the motocross bike. Brings the best of both worlds together. And it's an absolute weapon. Kev from KTM absolutely hooked me up. I've got everything I could possibly need on this bike. You know, protection for the disc, Hinson clutch cover to make sure I don't do anything wrong, the oversized front disc, and the exhaust pipe, and a couple odds and ends here and there. But you know, this bike is ready to race. So, you know, getting a new bike and putting the hours in, you know, immediately the first thing you do is spend a couple hours just getting comfortable. And one of the first things I deal with after getting comfortable on the bike is dealing with the rear shock and getting your sag sorted. It's one of the most fundamentally important aspects of a bike and can make a huge difference in the handling. So a couple things you guys just need to know about setting the sag. First off, every ride is different. Every person has different preferences on how they like to set things up. So you guys need to do what's best for you, and the best way to figure that out is through hours and testing. So first thing, you need to make a mark on where you're going to measure from. KTM comes standard with a sag line, which makes things even simpler. So it's KTM ready to race yet again. If you don't, all you need to do is take a Koki and make a line, and that'll be your point of reference for all measurements. So if you have a sag tool, it's really simple. It's made in such a way that you can put it into the rear axle and measure to the sag. So what you want to do is have this at 0 on your sag line. If you don't have a sag tool, you can always use a tape measure. Everyone's got one, and it's just as simple. Obviously just a little bit more math required. So what you need to do is always measure from the same place and to the mark that you've made, or the sag line that's already there on the standard of KTMs. So what you do is you put your tape measure into the same spot in the axle and you measure up to your sag line. So I'm sitting at 61.5 centimeters. So you need to remember that number, because once we take it off the stand, that number is going to change, and then you're going to do a little bit of subtracting to get what your static sag is, and then again to get what your rider sag is. So we've measured where our initial marks were. After this, we take the bike off the main stand, so it's now under load from its own weight. Okay, first thing you do is you just compress the shock a little bit. You need to make sure that you don't put any weights on it anymore, and now put it in again and measure it exactly the same way I did. At that mark, it tells me now that my static sag is at 35 millimeters. Okay, so now if you don't have the sag tool, again, the normal tape measure will work perfectly, and you need to measure exactly how you did when the bike was on the stand. So you take your point into the axle and you measure it up to the sag line. Okay, now it measures 58 centimeters. So what you do is, now our initial measurement was 61.5 millimeters. Obviously that was written down, and now it's at 58, so you need to subtract the 2, and that gives you 35 millimeters. So we've got the static sag all set up. We know exactly where we're at with that. Now the next step is for the rider to get on the bike. This is very important. You need to make sure you're sitting in your natural riding position, both feet on the pegs, as with the rider here. What you can do is get someone to help holding the handlebars just to keep you straight, but just make sure they don't put any pressure down on the bike at all. And again, then we go straight to measure. So if you don't have a sag tool, just as easy with a tape measure, but just make sure you remember what your initial measurement was, and always make sure that you measure from the same spot and to your same line every time. So into the axle, up, and I am now at 51 centimeters. So the initial measurement was 61.5 centimeters. Now we're down to 51 centimeters, which gives us a rider sag of 105 millimeters. Okay, so once you've got your measurements sorted and you know exactly whether you need to go harder or softer, if you need more sag or less sag, firstly what you'll need is your 4mm Allen key, and you need to loosen this lock nut on your rear shock. Just feel and make sure that it's loose. After that, you can use the KTM tool to adjust the spring, either make it tighter or loosen it up a little bit. Basically what this does, it compresses the spring. More load on the spring means it's more compressed, and less load, less compressed, obviously. So once you have figured out from your measurements, you'll know whether you need to go harder or softer on the spring. Alternatively, if you don't have the KTM part, punch and hammer will work perfectly. And this rear shock's got these awesome little grooves that the punch can fit nicely into, and you just tap. Move a couple turns clockwise or anti-clockwise, and then we measure again to make sure we're on the money. So guys, a couple key measurements that you need to take note of is, for this bike specifically, my KTM 450XC, the manual calls for a 35mm static sag and 105mm rider sag. Each bike's different slightly, so just make sure with your manuals and double check. Kind of the norm is to run between a 35 and 45mm static sag and between 105 and 115mm rider sag, but again, dependent on the bike and also personal preference. You know, we have the time now to get this set up, and you know, to really get dialed in, you need lots of testing. So 1mm here, 1mm there makes a huge difference to how the bike feels, and can make a huge difference to your speed and how you ride. So that's it, guys. A couple tips on how to set up the sag. It's really important. It makes a huge difference on the bike. So you know, guys, if you've got the time, get in the garage and set up that sag. You know, send us your videos, send us any questions you have, and we'll gladly help. And like to see what you guys are doing in the downtime.